the art is not only present in the traditional places of the art, in galleries, in museums, in collector spaces, but the place of the art is very important also in the center of our societies, where people, whatever they do, whatever they work, however they live, in the center of our society. This is what the book wants to show, with a lot of most impressive essays and examples how we should aim and how it already happens to bring art into the center of the society again. And I consciously say again, because if we look back into the origin of the art was in the center where the people lived and where they worked. And this is something which has disappeared a little bit. The focus has shifted in the last decades from this societal life to the mechanisms of economy, which per se is not bad, but it is bad if this focus is about to monopolize the future of the art. And this is what we should be aware of. Thank you, Martin. Thank you all the contributors, and I wish this event a lot of success and interest, and even more, I wish the book a lot of readers, and after having read it, a lot of discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gerald Bast, for this opening speech and for your statement. My name is Martin Krenn, and I'm the editor of the book Dialogical Interventions. And I'll give you a short overview about the book that will last about 10 minutes. And after this short presentation, so this short presentation will be followed by a 30 minutes talk about neoliberalism and the promise of participatory art by Suzana Milevska. This talk will be followed by a presentation of the performance artist Gluklya, who's also here already. She will discuss her practice in dialogue with Cornelia Kolmann, related to the topic Transmigrantivism, embracing different contexts. The last item of the program of this evening will be the panel discussion, dialogue, or antagonistic practice, the role of social art in the age of radical right-wing populism and neoliberalism, with Suzana Milevska, Barbara Putzbrecko, Tanja Happel, Natalia Pershina Yakimanskaya, also known as Gluklya, very difficult, and I will do the moderation. How can art bring change in society? What is the aesthetic quality of dialogue in art, and what role does autonomy play in dialogical art? This book investigates how dialogical art navigates between the poles of social engagements, aesthetic autonomy, and societal change. In their contribution, its authors and artists examine the relevance of dialogical and interventionist interventionist practices and reflect on their role in transmitting new forms of knowledge and experience through the arts. From its beginnings, this publication has developed on the basis of the complex dialectic relationship between theory and practice. While the book's second section is entitled simply Practices, the first section has been assembled under the heading Philosophy and Context. It has become, as the title suggests, wider in scope. While considering how dialogical intervention can be related to the evolution of art and its theoretical underpinnings, it also endeavors to address not only the question of what art is, but also how it relates to life in general, both by taking a philosophical look at it and by taking context as a point of departure. Programmatically, as it were, philosophy and context begins with a conversation about action taken very directly in a situation posed by real life in 2015. By the end of that summer, hundreds of thousands of refugees had arrived in Europe, most of them fleeing the war in Syria. The University of Applied Arts agreed to host a large number of these people in this building. It was a vacant building at the time, and it became a new home, and now it's a home for many of its institutes. But at this time, refugees were staying here for more than 1 year. A process was set in motion that brought together an entire art school in a complex of activities dwarfing most carefully planned social interventions. Art, social commitment, and most importantly, willingness to put in long hours helping people in need merged in a concerted effort unique to this place and time. The participants in the conversation transcribed here were myself, artist Tanja Appel, who during the period under discussion realized the project at the Refugee Center, and University's Rector Gerald Bast. So there's a conversation about this situation, and this is how this section starts. Mary Jane Jacobs' text, Dewey and Social Art Practice, sketches a theory of socially engaged art based on the philosophy of John Dewey. Dewey left behind a wide-ranging and highly respected philosophical body of work. Jacob elevates his concept of aesthetic experience to a central aspect of current art. In his essay on art activism, Boris Greuß defines artistic aestheticization, formulating it with the intention of offering a contrast to the politicization of art. Citing critiques put forth by Walter Benjamin and Guy Debord, Greuß rejects the use of art as a medium of genuine political protest, stating that doing so aestheticizes action, turning it into a spectacle and thus neutralizing its practical effect. Whenever, he maintains, an artist engages in activism, for example by conceiving projects or works to support a political campaign, then this would be design and not art. It's a very complex and also difficult text, but I think it's also very interesting that he tries to differentiate between an artistic aestheticization that is, from his point of view, coming from the avant-garde practices, political, whereas a political action or political activism done by artists is more, from his point of view, in the sphere of design. But he says that this is not bad, but he wants to differentiate these two approaches. Part 1, Philosophy and Context, also consists of Suzana Milevska's text, Participatory Institutional Critique and Other Critical Dialogues Between Art and Society, in which she discusses the rigorous formalist division between ethical and aesthetic aspects of art. My own contribution, Social Art in Democracy, investigates the political significance of social art as dialogical practice. In Art and Communication Practices, the head of our department, Barbara Putt-Greco, outlines the study program of this department. She underlines the programmatic significance of communicative practice as dialogical intermediation, defining it as the basis of a modern, committed and critical stance, both in art and teaching. The book's second section, Practices, is composed of interviews with socially and politically engaged artists and collectives, interspersed with inserts by students of the Angewandte, in which they document their social art practices in collage form. The framework for the projects and performances presented in the inserts was a multi-semester course I headed at the university, offered under the title Dialogical Interventions, which subsequently became the title of this publication. It facilitated an exchange project with Ulster University, a study trip to Belfast, a presentation at the city's Piers Square Gallery, and other international discursive framework within which the students developed their work. Bringing together students and experienced international artists, the conversations reproduced here detail a fascinating spectrum of practices, methods, and insights. So this is one insert by Lidiane Sarah Kölbel, Cornelia Kolmann, and Nora Rika. They made an insert about their project Fences, and this is followed by an interview with the Belfast artist Aisling O'Byrne. Leah Young, Ariane McManus, and Shoba Untersteiner made an insert about the project Textile Stories, which they set out to collect knowledge handed down to them by elder relatives. They queried the way history is written, taking a more personal approach. They also made an interview with Renate Höhlwart and Elke Smolic from AFOK. Tanya Happel's project To Get Rolling took place from winter 2015 until summer 2016 at the refugee accommodation facility provided by the University of Applied Arts here in this building. And she will also be part of the discussion and talk about her project later. Hopefully. Tanya, are you here?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, okay. That's good. Tanya also made an interview with Florian Malzacher in which they talk about art projects and artist groups engaged in forming socio-politically active organizations. His approach is special in that it understands the founding of organizations as art, making artist organizations per definition fundamentally different from conventional lobbying groups. Part 2 practices also consists of the insert about the project Learning by Heart by Nina Kugler and How to Approach Soil by Rosi Ben, Marius Fischer and Johanna Volkmann, as well as additional interviews with the Russian performance artist Gluklya, who will present her work this evening, as well as an interview with the Belfast-based artist Alistair McLennan, who is a key exponent of live art in Northern Ireland and beyond. And the book closes with a look at the research agency Forensic Architecture with the group's deputy director, Christina Wagner. All the theories and practices presented in this book share the common aim of concretely demonstrating how art can intervene in power relations while strengthening societal cohesion and working toward lasting democratization. I would also like to thank all the authors, artists, and everyone else who participated in the project and have supported this publication. Sincere thanks go to Manora Auersberg, Christopher Barber, Gerald Bast, Marcel Breuer, Scott Evans, Angela Fössl, Patricia Gerger, Theresa Hattinger, Andrea Rubin, Frank Müller, Peter Mutschler, Aisling O'Byrne, Barbara Putz-Brecko, Anja Seitenbusch, Elke Smodic, Stefan Trimmel, and Barbara Wimmer, to mention a few of the people whom I want to thank. So, thank you very much. This was the short introduction. I could not explain everything in detail, of course. Also, I hope that you get interested and you can also buy the book there and read it at home. But I hope you got an insight about the publication. Now, I'd like to ask you, Suzana, to the stage, come to the stage. You can just sit on my side if you want. Change the presentation.
Well, you're on my presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me here. For inviting me back to Vienna and for reminding me on these difficult times when the refugees arrived in Vienna, because at that time I was teaching at the Academy of Fine Arts, and actually in the room, in the teaching room where I was teaching, some of the refugees were sleeping before my classes. So that was really not easy, to negotiate this space of, on the one hand, the privilege of all the students really learning there, enrolling in official terms, and refugees that were given refuge in these rooms, and all the promises and failed promises went through that. So you reminded me to this period. I will start my presentation.
Yes, but first I'd like to introduce you, if you don't mind. Suzana Milevska is a visual culture theorist and curator. Her theoretical and curatorial interests include post-colonial critique of the hegemonic power regimes of representation, gender theory, and feminism, as well as participatory, collaborative, and research-based art practices. She has been the principal investigator at the Politecnico di Milano of Traces, a Horizon 2020 project, where I was also part of. From 2013 to 2015, she was the endowed professor for Central and Southeastern European art histories at the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, where she also taught at the visual culture unit of the Technical University. Suzana Milevska was Fulbright Senior Research Scholar at the Library of Congress in 2004. In 2012, Suzana Milevska won the Igor Zabel Award for Culture and Theory. So thank you very much that you are here, and I know also this is really a great honor that you visit Vienna now, because you come more or less directly from New York. So it was quite a travel experience. But thank you very much.
Anyway, I'm really glad to be back and to be given this possibility to revisit some of my earlier texts on participatory art. Actually, I wrote the first text on participatory art back in 2006 in Springerin. It was published in Springerin, and ever since then this text was quoted many times. But in 2016, when I met with Martin in Salzburg in one symposium, I was given the second chance to revisit this term and this topic, from completely other perspective of full-blown neoliberalism. And that gave me this possibility, to be more critical, because if you go back to read my old text, I'm very naive there, and fully accepting the promise of the participatory art. When I got invited for this publication, I was not fully aware of the other text and of the whole context, and I must say that when I started preparing for this particular session, it came to my mind that this dialogical imagination is a term that I used to really like and use in the past because of Mikhail Bakhtin, to whom I didn't refer so much in my text. So it's really interesting to make the whole circle and to go back in history of intertextuality. He was really very important for my writing at the beginning of my career. The other reference that is not in my presentation but I really want to start with is also Beatrice Spivak's text, Can the Subaltern Speak? This text is never mentioned in this context of participatory art or dialogical aesthetics of Lancaster, but actually it is so closely related because if you remember, this is one of the most quoted texts, but also most misquoted texts, because many theories quote just the question from the beginning and answers that are in the first half of the text, but the text ends with the question about who is listening. And this is actually the very basis for dialogical intervention. Not only the question is rhetoric, whether the subaltern speaks, but the real question and the answer is who is there to listen in order to be able to have the dialogue. So this is my introduction before the introduction, and I'm going to talk about neoliberalism and the promise of participatory art, but in order to talk about this, we actually have to start with the promise, of course. And the promise of the participatory art is that it focuses on invitation, inclusion, sharing, collaboration, and voluntary participation. So it's all good until now. It's really a very well-based promise, but there are always downfalls. The main hypothesis in my text and in participatory art is that and in this critique, particularly this critique, is that the general socio-political context and contradictions lead to preventing the transformative potentials of participatory art. So whatever you promise, there is something that hinders, that prevents this promise from happening. It's a very radical critique. It doesn't happen always, but we have to go to this radical end and then to start from there. So participatory art as means for social change is in the core of my presentation. There are different kinds of participatory art, but I cannot cover all of them, and to be honest, I'm not really interested in all of these aspects of participatory art. So I'm talking about promises and hopes on the one hand. I'm talking about contradictions and paradoxes on the other hand that lead to failures. So the main aim of my presentation is to unravel why and how the promise for social changes fails, or is partly unfulfilled, becomes infelicitous performative speech acts in terms of Austin. So this map of ideas of my presentation tells you that I start with this theoretical background of the topic, then I look both in participatory art as artistic practice and the promise of participatory art for social change. So these are two different things that are interconnected, of course. So I have to go back again and to say that these two kinds of participation are fully legitimate. It's only me that I'm not interested in the first aspect, which is this participatory art where you invite the audience and you expect that the audience will interact somehow with the work without fully structure this participation. And this is more or less related to institutional critique and to the promise that art institutions should be open to the audience, art should be somehow changing art institutions, and the relations between artist and curator should be dialogical. It's all good, but I'm not there. I'm really more interested in this participation as a promise for the democratic system and participatory art as a promise of social change. And I've fully dedicated my personal curatorial and theoretical practice mainly in this realm. So all these different aspects are present in this circle that is really, I have to change this, but it doesn't move this way. not sure. Anyway, in this circle we can see all these different aspects that are intertwined in participatory art, all these different promises that sometimes hinder or neutralize each other. Because if you promise to different minority groups, for example, that they will all participate and they are in conflict with each other, then you're in really deep trouble. Because actually you cannot go beyond all these conflicts in the society, starting from the position of an artist. And all these contradictions actually also prevent the promise, the main general promise of participatory art to take place. When I mentioned this ground basis, the theoretical ground, I thought about key terms that come from different theories that I was aware and I was fully informed before writing all these texts. And some terms like being greed, coexistence, recuperation, community and commoning, relational aesthetics, they all somehow informed my text, even though I didn't really reflect on each of these concepts so fully and profoundly. I was really interested in Nancy, basically, in his concept of being as always already being with as basis for participatory art, where you cannot really, as the rector introduced our session today, you cannot think of art as completely isolated from the society. And in my new text for the book, I referred to this old ideal from antiquity on Kalopagatia, which is the ideal of thinking together the good and beautiful. And this was lost. I fully agree with the director that this was lost, and basically during the modernism, this link between the good and beautiful somehow got dissolved with the formalist aesthetics, where they really made the distinction, clear distinction, what is aesthetics, what is ethics, what is good, what is beautiful. But to go really fast in this part of the text, I'm really interested in coessentiality and coexistence. Being we is not, something that happens only afterwards. In Nancy's words, the being is always already being with the other, and this is similar to go back to Bakhtin when he says, I about myself, I with the other, and the other about me. It's really interesting how these two different traditions in philosophy and theory are so close to each other, and maybe in future I can somehow go back to it. But I was also using a lot of Austin's theory about imfelicitus or felicitus to speech acts, because exactly of my critique of the neoliberal context in which we live. So all this as a promise is fine unless we don't contextualize this today, in this very moment where we live. And this very context is this stage that I'm talking about in the more recent text, this neoliberal stage, where everything that you promise is very similar, like in Austin's example of getting married on a theatrical stage, where actually the basic conditions for getting married are not met, because it's a theater play. And this is some kind of metaphor that I'm using here, that for participatory art, the neoliberal stage prevents whatever promise the bride and groom gives to each other, because of the context, the wider context. And this is something that I put in relation to the we, that is the concept of Nancy, the we that we cannot truly say today. He says that we forgot about this quality, and this is exactly what is happening now with the refugee crisis. This we is only on the surface. There are so many texts saying we are all refugees, and this is something that sounds to me very simple. We are not all refugees. We have to make this distinction. This aporia of we was also important for a text that I recently wrote about refugees as participants in participatory projects, which I must tell you, I hardly find any project that I would really fully accept, artistic project that deals the refugees as participants. Something is wrong there, and I will go to some examples. So When I talk about artistic practices, I'm often asked, but what kind of projects, participatory projects, you would support? And this is the most difficult part, you know, because I became so critical on the way of the, you know, research that I found problems with almost every artistic practice that deals with participatory art. So please don't ask me this question, even though I do have some examples that I would like to talk about. The genealogy is not so important for today, but of course not everything started with participatory art practices. There were projects that were even the happenings in the 60s, or community-based art projects that also involved the audiences. So for me, this is a very masculine thing to do, to make a very precise distinction between what is participatory art, what is community-based art, what is relational aesthetics. I'm not that person, you know. I leave this to Gluklya or Hector or whoever, because this is something that I think is not very productive, to be honest. Because in my view, all these different artistic practices are intertwined. And you cannot really say until here we have relational projects, and from there we start to have participatory art projects. You know, they are all intertwined. There are relations in the participatory project. There is participation in the relational project. So I don't want to go further there. I would just say that what is in common for all these practices is the critique of autonomy, hegemony, hierarchies, and elitism, exclusion, monolithic experience, authority, centralization. They all somehow have this in common, but they do have lots of differences, and we can go on and on with these differences. The potentials of community art from the history was already there, promising the dialogue with different communities, so we should not forget about this. And different members of local community will come together in, for example, in Stephen Willats, who's one of the most important artists who worked with community-based art. This promise is already there, but he's now very well criticized as well for the failures that came in meanwhile. So the hierarchialism I mentioned, the monolithic experience, authority, centralization, they were also part of institutional critique. And this is what these art projects have in common with the socially based projects, the projects aiming to social critique. I will mention quickly this participatory institutional critique, because this was a term that I coined only after some protests in Macedonia, where the community, the local community, the protesters were so disgruntled and disappointed by the government that they started paintballing the monuments that were built in Skopje. So they started also making graffitis on the monuments, which were in a way participatory institutional critique, like one newly built temple arch was fully criticized with a graffiti saying the gate is ugly, which was anonymous. It was participatory, it was written by the community. One term that I did mention, and also Boris mentions, is the Guy Debord's term of course, the recuperation. And this is something that just, bothers me, that these new neoliberal powers and new media actually recuperate whatever participatory art does and promises. So some aspects of participatory art from the past are not any longer so subversive as they used to be. And in this sense, when I revisit this text, I say I'm a little bit naive. I sound a little bit naive, because now this promise is obvious failure. It's really important that I show some art projects, and one of the projects that I saw in Venice Biennale in 2001 was one of the first projects that was in the National Pavilion of Slovenia, but it was participatory. It was very new. At that time in Venice there were no participatory art projects, and also it was very strange trick to the system, to the national pavilion and the national stage, because the artist Tadej Pogačar, who made international congress of sex workers from all the world, he invited all these different associations that are nationally based, without really fully admitting and announcing this to the state that sent him as representative of Slovenia. So there was a kind of tricking the system, kind of redistribution of funds, everything that I would support in participatory art practices. So for all the duration of the biennial, all these different small nationally based organizations of self-organized sex workers would come to Venice and had their presentations and had their marches in Venice. It's interesting because at this very moment the Venice Biennial just opened, that in fact there is a kind of long tradition of participatory art, and only now they even gave a award to a participatory project this year. I guess it's really something that is normalized now, normativized, but at that time it wasn't the case. Another artist that worked a lot with participatory practices is Tanya Ostojic, who diverted some funds from a project to give to refugees and immigrants in Germany to learn German, because as an immigrant herself, she realized that this is really costly. So she supported art funds in order to give free possibilities for free lectures to artists. One of the first participatory projects that I engaged with was actually the long-existing London Biennial group of artists. It's only called Biennial. There is nothing to do with the Biennial. They do make biennial exhibitions, but it's a group. It's a group that is completely informal. You can become a member there as an immigrant, as refugee, whoever comes to London, and it's a very rare opportunity because the UK society, artistic art world is very closed. So this was really a promise that you can still make art even though you are immigrant there. So there are different aspects of this work that actually it allows to people that do not have any permits, any residences, to still exhibit and work in London. And one project that made me so critical while I was living in London was Karsten Heller's project, because that was fully instrumentalized by the local cultural policy, because they said that it was 1 million participants that went through this project, that visited and actually entered this light in Tate Modern in the turbine. And I was there, I was visiting Tate often. One thing that they didn't tell you is that these were the school children who would come in groups and would re-enter the slide each time that they would visit. So they counted all the school children as audience, and the next year Tate Modern gained double more funding because of this big success. And this leads me to my critique of the instrumentalization of participatory art, and also using this calculation, these indicators, the audience, as a basis of promoting participatory art. But there are projects that give me hope, and this is the Martin Krenn and Ashlyn Byrne project, with which I collaborated for 3 years. And this was a project that was dealing with the previous ex-prison, former prison Long Cash in Belfast, that was abandoned and closed, but there were many objects that were made by prisoners during the years of the travels before the closure of the prison, which afterwards were somehow lost. The information about these objects was lost, and with the help of a book by Laura McCartney, and also with the research of the artist, they somehow regained this access to these objects. At first they located the people that owned them, they interviewed them, and I cannot explain the whole project, but I did write about it in my text. And this was fully participatory because they engaged with both sides of the conflict, with the loyalists and Republicans. They included participants of also this woman group of 50 plus, who were the wives, sisters, or relatives of the prisoners, who really cared about this object, but it wasn't really about the object themselves. They made the photographs, they exhibited the photographs, and also they exhibited, they published the stories, the narrations about these objects, and they gave the possibility to the people who cared about these objects, who owned them, who made them, to even name the photographs on this gadget that I really am in love with the gadget. They use this gadget as a kind of ad hoc opportunity to name the object, the artistic object, by the participants, which is not quite often. You know, the participatory art has this really sometimes, you know, aspect that the participants are there, but afterwards they are not named, they are not even given this possibility, you know, to enter the project cooperation fully, and not to name the artworks themselves. So I came to this criticism that I don't have much time now to talk about this, starting from Marxist theory. I started with this labor that is involved in participatory projects. I started with the critique of the economy of participatory art, which is important for me. What happens with the objects that are produced? You know, I sometimes joke that there are some kind of piles of rubbish, you know, made of these, you know, products of participatory art. Because nobody takes care afterwards what happens with all this accumulation of different production, you know, during participatory art. You invite the audiences, you tell them, draw here something, and then you don't know what to do with that. Nobody analyzes the objects that come out. And of course, I looked at also at the use value of these objects, exchange value, redistribution of surplus value, ulterior value, value form, and the precariat. All these participants that are invited, they are often not paid. Their maternity, for example, leave is not paid. Even the nannies are not paid of single mothers. There are so many problems that somehow accumulate and pile with this participatory project, because you never ask what else is happening in the life of these people that you expect to participate in your project. So I was looking at this important aspect of capital versus wealth. How you make wealth. You can make wealth, of course, you can become wealthy with creating wealth, but also with taking wealth. And this is much more common in neoliberalism, and this is the problem also with participatory art, because very often the quality and the quantity of participatory art is based on this taking wealth from somebody else, somebody who can actually gain something for the same time instead of sitting in your project and creating participatory art. So I have some unpleasant questions that we can go back to them after I finish. Who will ultimately benefit the most from certain participatory projects? Who decides and how to valorize the range and level of involvement of the invited people? Who profits, basically? Sometimes I go so far and say that there is a Ponzi scheme there. Who comes first gains the most. And then everybody else that comes later, they can only hope that they will gain something, but there is not much rest there. So for some people, you know, there is, this is drawing by Dan Przewski, there is gain, but the rest not so much. So this quantification of audience I mentioned as a bigger problem in EU funding, and we did have this, just last month we had a review meeting of our EU project, and we learned that actually each of the clicks on Facebook that you gave to us goes in our favor. So we quantified your participation in our project in a way, and we gained a lot because of that. I'm self-critical here. So what is accountable is the question, what hasn't been accounted. There are many, many questions there that I don't have the answer. The reimbursement of expenses, remuneration of the spent time, eventual production fees of the participants. There are some solutions, that we can learn from our experiences and we can avoid these problems, because I didn't give up, don't get me wrong, I didn't give up on participatory art. I really hope that there are projects that still fulfill the promise of participatory art, but we have to be careful. And it's really dangerous if you simply give up, because there are not many different possibilities out there for art, for social change actually left. So if we think about transparent discussion regarding the entire concept, that not many artists give away the whole concept to the participants, for example, crediting and paying the participation, signing contracts for collective and individual copyrights, fees from further distribution of the work, you know. Not many people think about this. How come that all these participants contributed so much to your project, but then they're not mentioned and they never get any remuneration afterwards? So I'm very radical here. I think that a participatory budget has to be assigned from the very beginning of the project. In the budget, there should be a budget that is specifically targeting the participants, and this is something that usually happens at the end. You know, you try to manage somehow, you know, when you realize that not many people came, so you have to pay something, but that's not the solution. Some sources of the conflicts are the production conditions in which we live. To go back to neoliberalism, that something is not a problem of ourselves. The problem comes from the society, from the economy in which we all operate. And I will end here, because this is the most important thing. This is something that even the genius project cannot resolve. You know, you have to change the economy in order to avoid all these problems. So, but at least you have to be aware that what you promise will be hindered at the very next step because of all these obstacles in the society, institutions, how they work. You know, you have to start from zero. So in order to really make a successful participatory project, I would say that from the very beginning you need to invest in these questions, not at the end, but at the very beginning you have to be aware which are the contradictions that you will face at the end. So all these means, forces, relations, modes of production, building, distributing and redistribution of capital, all these aspects are really important, and these are part of the society. They are not, you cannot, we were talking with Martin earlier, you cannot really talk only about artistic practices in this space, in this context. You have to start from the grid, societal grid and economical grid, in order to understand how your project will further, you know, fulfill the promise of change. So for now, this is my presentation. I have lots of other slides, but we will have discussion later, so I can go back to some aspects. Please keep in mind your questions.
Thank you, Suzana. Is there any question that someone wants to ask now?
During the panel.
We could also then have a discussion during the panel. Okay, then let's proceed in that way. Yes, please. Cornelia. So now I would like to introduce to you Gluklya. She was born in St. Petersburg and lives and works in Amsterdam. Considered one of the pioneers of Russian performance, she co-founded the artist collective Factory of Found Clothes, which uses conceptualized clothes as a tool for building a connection between art and everyday life. And she also is part and was one of the founders of Stordelia, of which she has been an active member since 2003. In 2012, the Factory of Found Clothes was reformulated as the Utopian Unemployment Union, a participatory project uniting art, social science, and progressive pedagogy. Gluklya's work, Trophies for Demonstration Against False Election of Vladimir Putin, was presented at the 56th Venice Biennale, curated by Okuyanesa in 2015. And then on my left side, also there is Cornelia Kolmann. She's born in 1993, and she's studying art education at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna, and completing the philosophy and psychology teacher training program at the University of Vienna. She's interested in connecting art and society and in using art to investigate dialogue involving sensitive topics. Transmedia art, textile art, performance, and photography are at the center of her evolving work. So I think it's easier when we take off the microphone and we just hold it in hands.
Yeah, so it's as well for us a kind of experiment that works, a kind of artist talk, and like if it works as a dialogue and discussion, I'm very happy to do that, and I think I will give now the microphone to you to start with the video and your first project.
Thank you. I thought you will ask me a question first.
Yeah, I can ask you first question as well. So, as you see, it's an experiment as well, and maybe it makes it alive as well. I first wanted to ask you, in the way you, in your text, or if you Google you quite often say that your work is political and social, and I wanted to ask you what was the kind of starting point of working in this way, and as well in a kind of way to work in the public and in a participatory art form.
Thank you very much. Starting point. Oh, that is so wide question. I think I will answer this question with the help of history. To go a little bit back to our alma mater, and alma mater in my case is the 90s, after Perestroika time in Russia. That was a very turbulent time. Imagine like USSR collapsed, so a huge country collapsed, and we were witnessed this enormous change. And that was a very fruitful soil for art. And every day was like, it was like universum, everyday art without borders, as avant-garde put it, I would say. So it was really no this frontier between art, like, or participatory art, or whatever labels like academics can put, frame our art, and the life itself. So every day was bringing some ideas, some change, some and during these days the clothes as a medium came to me and my colleague and my friends, and it was already a carnival. Because during our parties in my studio, for example, my friends, they like to change the dresses. And that's how I understood that actually changing the dress is the method to be free, to liberate yourself, to try to establish a dialogue and try to become an other person than you yourself. But at this 90s, our resistance was placed in absolutely, I would say, apolitical. So we were not political in the sense as we understood now. We were very much in our bubble, very much in our in our game, in our gymnasium girl, we called it our game, and we even have our own language, our own poetry, very very specific, very, only our language we have. So the people outside, they were hardly entered this game. But then 2000 came, so Putin came to power, and all of a sudden we found ourselves in a desert. So what to do? This power and money coming, and we are with this bubble. Also, it was going along our personal becoming adults, like we became mothers. So it's also structuring your mind as toward political. I would say. Oops, sorry. I think it's a time now to see the film.
Yeah. Maybe
because since this Putin era started, we understood that we have to find another language, and we understood that there is a people around us, and we have to try to understand these people, and we have to find the link between our poetry and the people needs. So we were in front of searching the universal language, although that's a problem also with universality, and it's not so easy, of course. But now I would like to show you the 1st of May demonstration, a little piece from the video, because that is, I think we can consider now as a new form of exhibition, because that is a dialogue with the people, and it's going to be clear why you will see, but it is not for by chance this dialogue happening during 1st of May, because, for example, we cannot imagine that we are collaborating with the 9th of May, another great day, like a victory over fascism, which celebrated in Russia with the big pathetic million demonstration of Immortal Regiment. Immortal Regiment, it is when Russian people are going with the portraits of the ancestors which were killed in Second World War. And it is very much linked to the government. Vladimir Putin is blessing that, he is marching with people. So for us it's impossible to collaborate with this kind of demonstration. But the 1st of May demonstration is a Labor Day. It is going in St. Petersburg more interesting than Moscow. And with this day we can imagine that we can be with people, with the people, even if it is also communists, which are not communists, of course, it's only the label of communism in their party. And it's also, unfortunately, nationalists going, but it is still only the possibility to imagine that we can establish this dialogue with people, which is very necessary. So we'll see now that. So that was a conflict within this demonstration because the LGBT people, the queer community, were lying in the ground in solidarity with the killed killed person in Afghanistan. So they were in solidarity, like lying as an action, and the police, of course, they immediately grabbed them. So that was 2017, and our column called Column of Fragility, and it's always a question with whom we have to go and how, and we have several parties. We have this party of death, people which is growing now more and more, they are larger and larger year to year. Then we have feminists, then we have Rosa School, Что делать, and the Utopian Employment Union, the project that I'm now running. It's also going with this part of installation. And now, following the idea of trans artist, because I'm calling myself trans migrant artist, I have to jump to performance Carnival of the Oppressed Feelings, which was happened in Amsterdam. And as we talked with you previously, you told me that it would be nice if I will show the part which is before performance happened, right?
Maybe I can ask you before we, because I think it would be a good floating as well for the carnival. Maybe you can explain in a kind of way, because in the video we saw now in St. Petersburg, it was very obvious the artistic method as dressing up and using like a costume, or to step in a costume, and as well, like when I saw the video the first time, it felt very strong as well for me, the clothes which are on the sticks, because in a kind of way the clothes are always the closest to our body and very intimate, and putting it on the stick and away from the body has already its own moment, but as well to taking then somebody's clothes on. So, and I think this is as well a key point of the carnival, and maybe you can say something about your idea of dressing up, and as well the method of clothes in your artistic work.
Yes, thank you for a nice question. Yes, this story with the putting dress to the stick starts in 2012, because that was a year when people first time rushed to the streets, and it was unpredictable. It was like a blast, because since Yeltsin coup, it was nothing like that in Russia. Everybody was sleeping, everybody were occupied with their individualist careers, making money and so on. Capitalism were ruling Russia. So that was really unpredictable, even for most left artists and intellectuals, that something like that will happen. So in 2012, I came once from Amsterdam, because I'm constantly going up and down. Only last 3 years I'm mostly in Amsterdam, but usually it's like I'm really sharing my life between these two countries. And yes, and I'm just trying to put it short. So it was spontaneous decision which came what to do in this situation. Like, we are observing this enormous event that suddenly all people decided to protest against the false election of Vladimir Putin, because this election was terribly shamed. You can see in YouTube that people are how these manipulations are going, how people are didn't want to vote, and the system and the government is constructing the situation when this vote, their voice is going to the direction that they want, to Единая Россия, to unite this biggest party that we have. Putin party, the Unite Russia. So I was thinking, what should I do? I don't want to to go out just with the slogan like in the paper. So I was thinking, oh, what I have with my dresses, so I will write on dresses, and that's how I will go. And it was very quick, very simple, so it was this hanger, and I attached it to the stick, to the stick from the actually mop for cleaning. So it was very quick, and it was a slogan: the pension has to be honest. Yeah, and it was a sign and the fist, and later the flower appeared as a symbol of revolution. Did I answer the question?
Yeah. So I think, in short, it was as well a symbol like that democracy is like in danger and it needs a civil society to stand up. And you, as an artist, use your artistic method to show that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
So should I show something?
So maybe now it's important to say that we are now in Amsterdam, or with this project.
Yeah, now we are in Amsterdam, and this is Utopian Employment Union, and this project is built upon the belief in the equality of people without regard to their social status. So what is written here. And before you will see this Carnival of the Oppressed Feelings, the 3-hour performance, which is also linked with the protest demonstration that you just saw, I will show you how preparation was going. So in order to establish the dialogue with refugees, I have rented a studio in the former prison Weimar Bias. It is a prison which was in south of Amsterdam. It was looking like that. And here you see the part Lola Leak, and it is anti-krach, the anti-squat, which everybody can rent the studio. It was a bunch of people, like from businessmen, computer firms, artists, performers, whoever can rent a studio there. And in another part, the government, the Dutch government, put refugees, which was, of course, which is a ridiculous, awful act, because the Dutch people are very practical, so they think, so we have one place, so we have this prison, why not? We can put it there. So the aspects as an aura, as a history, as all that we think very important, as usually it's ignored. So there is nothing concerning ethic wrong to put the refugees to the former prison. So the prison looked like that. And the first time I saw this corridor, my heart was shrinked really, because it was so impressive. I don't know how to describe these feelings. So that is, for example, the rooms where the criminals can speak with the lawyer before they go to eternal prison. And that is exactly the part where refugees were living, because for artists and other people they gave the part where the apparatus who's serving the prison usually were placed, the office of the prison. And that is particularly prison. And here you can see the list, which is refugees with the marks. The numbers means the houses, the cases of houses for refugees. So the camp, or as I said, where these refugees were living, they were waiting the house there. And when they were getting the house, they were marking it that the refugee have a house. So the notion of time was the main subject, one of the main subjects in this research. And that's, you see how it transformed to costumes, to open a little bit the process. Then what I was doing, I was visited as I said, this building, it was very difficult to find the way how to do it, but with the help of friendly institution, we managed, so that I saw the courses, what they are doing. The social workers are trying to organize the people's life there, like bringing them some kind of occupation, so the sewing process. And I started to do the objects with the things that I found in prison. That is, for example, one of the refugees from Aleppo, Marwa, came to see the clothes. Yeah, and now I want to say a little bit about this language of fragility game that I established, because it was a bridge, it was a dialogue with refugees. Why? Because the language, the learning of Dutch language is a dominant strategy of government, how to start the dialogue with refugees. So everybody must learn Dutch. It is absolutely the rule, and a lot of people failing in this way. Its statistic is a kind of 70% people cannot go through, pass this exam. And I was learning it myself. It's very difficult. Yes. So I proposed the game about the words, which is sounding the same, and meaning is absolutely different. And these drawings made by Marwa Abud from Aleppo. And it's rare when actually refugee want to draw, but she really wanted to draw. It was very good collaboration. So you see that kas is a cheese, and in Arabic it is glass, or bas, it sounds for person from Aleppo as a bus. Here, interesting, because Marwa told me that parents wanted to marry her against her will, and you see that she drew the house and fire together. So the person is going to the girl is going to the house where it is fire. And then we practiced and played this game inside this prison with the performer Robert Stein. He is often in Vienna, maybe you know him. He's a wonderful performer. This is held, which sounds like mole, like the animal in the earth. And that is a highlight of this game, because these parents are like vampires, because they want to marry Marwa against her will. And here is house.
How this game leads then to the, how did this game then leads to the carnival of the oppressed feelings? Because I think we are already a bit in time hurry, so maybe we can go there, and maybe in the end of that you can say as well what
the term fragility means for you, because I think this is as well a very important term in your work, fragility and
that was exactly like the bridge to the carnival. This game was a method how to even, for example, invite refugees to the studio, because otherwise the art is so unattractive to them and so impossible to invite. So I have to invite them with the help of something that they really need to do. That was the bridge. And then carnival happened, because I thought that carnival is very important to give the person the possibility to be not himself or herself, and they are very often shy, especially women. They don't want to be public, they don't want to go, but if they have the mask, if they have the costume, for them it's easier, psychologically easier to hide themselves behind the mask, behind the costumes. And another aspect is that surrealism is very much, from my point of view, linked with the topic of migration, because there is a lot of unknown, a lot of fears, a lot of strange things in society. Like people are very often looking at refugees as monsters or something.
And in a way, these you did the clothes together with them, and then the making of it was a very important part as well.
Yes. Yes, we made, this is, for example, the studio where we made the costumes. You see it here, that there is a mole in the left that went with us to carnival. Maybe we see 5 minutes of carnival and that's it.
I was asking that because of the making the clothes, because I think in one of Martin's texts is as well referring to Dewey, who is asking the question how the making process can be aesthetic, and in this making process can be involved dialogue, and so this actually gives a new perspective, I think, on the process of participatory art when we look at Dewey and the form of making. So I think it was important to stress out that you did the costumes with the participants as well together.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you very much.
know what you receive. Most of the language that you have received are translated from Arabic, but they translate what they want, so you need more access to sources. There's sources.
Thank you very much.